and welcome to another of our Christmas videos. Now this is quite a fun one. I was challenged to make this because if you've been watching my videos for some time, if you ever look at the comment section, there is always that one guy who puts cheese under all my videos. And he's fine to do so, Scott's a sweetie. But this all stemmed from being in the same Discord group and getting on about what kind of food and cake and snacks and things we like to eat at Christmas. And I think because it's been going on so long now, I can't remember, he can't remember, nobody else can remember what this all stemmed from. But I think it came from me liking Christmas cake with cheese on top. And if you are gasping in horror at this Victorian way of eating, it's actually quite nice. I quite like it. I mean, you can have it with the fancy cheeses, you can have it with the more mature cheddars. I like it, and I encourage you, if you haven't already tried it, go right now and try it for this Christmas, and let me know in the comments down below what you think of it. If it's atrocious, tell me. If you've loved it and it's a taste sensation, then let me know as well. But Scott tasked me with finding a fairy tale that its focus point was cheese. And I said, yeah, sure, of course I will. Until I actually went looking for one. But I've found one. And it's a Christmas one. And it's fun. So, without further ado, we are going to dive right in to The Boy Who Loved Cheese, which is a Dutch fairy tale. I can't find who it was written by. I can't find when it was published. It's just that it was a Dutch fairy tale, probably lesser known, but we're going to go through it right now. So our story starts with a 12-year-old Dutch boy called Klaus van Bommel. And he lived in a farm where cows were plentiful. And he was 5 foot tall, weighed 100 pounds, and had very rosy little cheeks. And his appetite was always good, and his mother declared on more than one occasion that his stomach had no bottom. He couldn't be filled. Now Klaus was a true farmer's boy, and as such had a standard farmer's fare for meal times. So at breakfast it was rye bread and milk. At dinner time or lunchtime, depending on where you are in the country, he had, as well as cheese and bread, he had boiled potatoes, which he scoured each potato on the end of his fork and dipped into hot melted butter. It sounds really, really nice. Oh, if the microphone's picking up some weird sort of air, there's a windstorm going on right now. It's like 60-mile-an-hour winds around here, and if it's, I don't know whether it'll pick it up or not. But if it does, it'll be all through the video. I won't be able to get rid of it. I'm not skilled enough. But we'll get back to Klaus and his meals. And at summertime, Klaus always had bread and milk with the cream taken away. And that was more or less his everyday meals. But the one standard at every single meal was that there were thin slices of cut cheese. And Klaus never thought that the cheese was cut thick enough for him. He wanted slabs of cheese on the stuff. On everything. And really, is there one thing that cheese doesn't go with? Cheese and chocolate? Yes, this face says that I'm going to have to try it to find out. I can attest that cheese goes with chocolate. So is there one thing that cheese doesn't go with? Because that is actually really, really nice. And for those of you who haven't keeled over in horror at my awful eating habits, stick with us. Now, there was always plenty to eat at the Van Bommel's house. Nobody ever went hungry. They were not rich by any means, but they were not on the poverty line either. Stacks of rye bread, a yard long and thicker than a man's arm, stood on end in the corner of the cool, stone-lined basement. The loaves of dough were put in the oven once a week. Baking time was a great event, and no men were allowed in the kitchen on that day unless they were called in to help. And as for the milk pails and pans, filled or emptied, scrubbed or set in the sun every day to dry, and the cheeses piled up in the pantry, this seemed sometimes enough to feed a small army. But Klaus always wanted more cheese. He was never satisfied. Now, in every other way, in every other aspect of his life, Klaus was quite a good child. He did well at school, he didn't He wasn't really mischievous. He wasn't a pain in the ass. You know, things that children are. But once he got to the table, he just could not stuff his face enough. And it led to his father asking him if he had a well under his jacket rather than just a normal 12-year-old's stomach. Now, Klaus had 3 younger sisters, Sally, Annie and Kate. And they were all given the same portions of food at every single table. And the mother nicknamed her daughters her little orange blossoms. She's quite cute. And at the dinner table, even after everyone else had finished, Klaus would keep on dipping all the potatoes into the hot butter, even after everyone had done for the day, and his mother would fondly call him her buttercup. But Klaus always wanted more cheese, and after being unusually greedy, his mother said that he was worse than butter and eggs, that meaning that he was worse and more troublesome than the yellow and white plant normally called toadflax by farmers. A very pretty flower, but really nothing more than an annoying weed. And really, ouch. Now, one summer's evening, it came about that Klaus had got a very good, very needed scolding from both his parents, and he was sent to bed, and he was sent to bed crying. And the reason why he was scolded was that he had teased every single one of his sisters unmercifully to give him their slices of cheese for the evening, and he had got caught. But not before. He had stuffed them all in his mouth, and it sat in his stomach as heavy as lead. Now a gentle breeze was blowing outside, and Klaus went to his bedroom window and opened it to smell the pine breezes from the woods nearby. And as he was looking into the woods, he saw these dancing magical lights. And one of these lights even broke off from the other ones and came up to his window, past his window, went up to the chimney and danced around it before coming back in front of him. And Klaus thought that these little lights sometimes varied from being blurry to having the shape of lovely girls. And this light beam that had come up to the cottage, he finally registered that it was actually speaking to him. And it was inviting him to come to the woods. And it invited him by saying, "We have plenty of cheese. You should come with us." Now, to make sure that he was actually hearing this right, Klaus rubbed his eyes and cocked his head, and the voice again whispered in his ear to come with them because they have lots of cheese. Now, Klaus had heard old people tell of the ladies of the wood, who whispered and warned travellers passing through. And in fact, he himself, on some explorations through the woods, had actually seen the fairy ring for himself deep in the pine woods. And it was to this fairy ring that the flame lady was beckoning him, again saying, "We've got lots of cheese and you should come with us." So Klaus decided, what the hell, I'll go down and see what it's all about. So he got himself dressed again, because by this time the moon was up and it was night time. And he stole out of the cottage and ran to the pine woods and the fairy ring. And it was there that Klaus came across a very, very odd sight. And at first Klaus thought it was a circle of big fireflies. Then he saw clearly that there were dozens of pretty creatures, hardly as large as dolls, but as lively as crickets. They were as full of light as if lamps had wings. Hand in hand they flitted and danced around the ring of grass, as if this was some kind of fun ritual. Now, hardly had Klaus got over his initial surprise, he found himself surrounded by these fairies, and found that some of the strongest among the fairies were the ones that had broken from the original dancing and come towards him, and as such surrounded him. And he felt himself pulled along by their dainty little hands into the fairy circle, and where one of the lovely fairies said to him that he just had to dance with them, and all the other fairies chanted that they had plenty of cheese, and plenty of cheese for him to eat. Now, upon hearing this, Klaus felt his feet to become as light as air, and he took the hands of the fairies around him, and he danced and danced in circles with them. Klaus was having so much fun that he didn't have the chance and didn't even think to look closely at the fairies surrounding him. He was having too good a time to even care what they looked like. He was just happy dancing in the fairy ring, under the moonlight, with all these strange mystical creatures. Now, Klaus danced with the fairies all night until the sky began to turn from first black to grey and from grey to rosy. And at this point, Klaus felt quite tired, he fell down and he fell asleep. And his head lay in the inner curve of the fairy ring with his feet in the dead centre. Now at this point, Klaus felt very happy and not tired at all, and he didn't realise that he was actually fell asleep, for he had no sense of being tired. And he thought that his fairy partners, the ones that he had been dancing with, were waiting to just give him all the cheese in the world. And on the tips of golden knives, they did just that. And just how good it tasted! He thought that now he could, and he would, eat all the cheese he had ever longed for in his life. There was no mother or father to scold him for eating too much, and the fairies seemed very happy at just bringing all this cheese to him, and he didn't have to move at all. He was very, very happy. But by and by he wanted to stop eating the cheese and he wanted to rest a while. His jaw ached and his stomach felt as if it was loaded with cannonballs. And he gasped for breath because he had eaten so much way too fast. But the fairies would not let him stop. They flew from the north, from the south, from the east and the west, and all the time they were bringing him cheeses and feeding it to him. So much so that it was practically force-feeding him cheese at this point. And because Klaus was so tired of eating cheese, and he kept his mouth closed, the fairies, still bringing him cheese, started to drop the cheese around him. So much so that all this cheese started to pile up, and it threatened to enclose him as if he was in a cheese cave. And the fairies still didn't stop. They just kept bringing more and more and more and more and more cheese to him. There were the red balls from Edam, the pink and yellow spheres from Gouda, and the grey loaf-shaped ones from Leyden. Down through the vista of sand in the pine woods he looked, and oh, the horror! There were the tallest and strongest of the fairies rolling along the huge, round, flat cheeses from Friesland. Any one of these was as big as a cartwheel and would feed a regiment. The fairies trundled the heavy discs along as if they were playing with hoops. They shouted hilariously, as with a pine stick they beat them forward like boys at play. Farm cheese, factory cheese, Alkmaar cheese, and, to crown all, cheese from Limburg, which Klaus never could bear because of its strong odour. Soon the cakes and balls were heaped so high around him that the boy, as he looked up, felt like a frog in a well. He groaned when he thought the high cheese walls were tottering to fall on him. Then he screamed, but the fairies thought that he was making music. They, not being human, do not know how a boy feels. At last, with a thick slice in one hand and a big hunk in the other, he could eat no more cheese, though the fairies, led by their queen, standing on one side, or hovering over his head, still urged him to take more. At this moment, while afraid that he would burst, Klaus saw the pile of cheeses as big as a house topple over. The heavy mass fell inwards upon him, and with a scream of terror he thought himself crushed. Waking up and rubbing his eyes, Klaus saw the red sun begin to rise over the sand dunes in the pine wood. Birds were singing, and he could hear the village clock chiming the very early hour. He felt at his clothes, and they were soaked with dew, and he looked around for the fairies that had been with him. But there were no fairies, and in his mouth was grass, which he had been chewing all night long. Now Klaus never did tell the story of his night with the fairies, and nor has he ever settled the question of whether the fairies disappeared because the house of cheese tumbled upon him, or because the sun rose, or because eating cheese before bedtime makes you hallucinate and gives you nightmares. So if you liked this cheesy little video, please leave a like and a comment down below, and let me know whether this Christmas you will be eating Christmas cake with cheese, and which kind of cheese that you like the most. But it's my time to leave you, so I hope you all have a very, very Merry Christmas.